So now I'm taking my mask off so that everyone can hear me, and we're more than 6 feet apart from everybody that's involved. So thank you for having me. I'm so excited to have a chance to speak with the community about our mental health and our family mental health.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. I was wondering if you could first just tell us a little bit about what your role is here with Community Hospital in Ohana, just so they have a little bit of your background.
Yeah, of course. So I moved out here almost 2 years ago in October of 2018 to become the inaugural physician-in-chief of Ohana, which at that time was just an idea and now is a little more than an idea. We're building a center for youth and family mental health. It'll be a place to access information, assessment, treatment, but also hopefully a resource for all of the families in our community who are interested in building mental fitness, as well as treating problems when they emerge. So that's what we're doing. We have a small team now, maybe a dozen of us, continuing to grow. We should be growing a lot in the next 2 years.
Wonderful. Well, we'll just go ahead and get started. One of the things I wanted to mention is that we're going to ask a combination of questions that come in through the Facebook Live today, as well as from ones that came in through our website earlier this week and last week. So we'll start with this one that came through the website earlier, and it is, if new mental health issues, including social anxiety, come up for our teens as a result of social isolation, where does a parent go for information? What are the signs that would signal a worried parent that professional help is needed?
Well, that's a wonderful question. And I would start by saying that we are living through history right now, or at least I think this is probably what it feels like to live through history, and it doesn't feel so good. It's really hard. There's a lot of upheaval, there's loss of routines, there's enormous disruptions, and there's incredible uncertainty. And we have it across multiple domains. And at this moment it affects our children as much as it affects us. So I would say that first, remember, anxiety is a normal response to uncertainty and to change. And in psychiatry, we do this irritating thing of using the word for a healthy response to also describe an illness. And anxiety disorders are also very common. They affect, psychiatric problems affect probably 1 in 5 children before they turn 18. And anxiety disorders are far and away the most common psychiatric illnesses of youth. Over a third of all the psychiatric illnesses of youth are anxiety disorders. So by all of that, I mean, if the disruptions of this time have led to a lot of worry, to a little bit more sadness, preoccupation, maybe easy tearfulness, in your younger kids, in your teenagers, in yourself, that's not necessarily a problem. The time you might start worrying about it is if it impairs function in a way that actually makes it harder to get support or to regain your balance. So if your teenager is sleeping less than usual, now this means you have to know what your teenager's sleep schedule is. But if they're having a hard time actually falling asleep, if they're waking up multiple times during the night and they can't fall back asleep, if you've noticed that they've lost interest in the things that normally piqued their interest. Again, this is tougher than usual to assess because they can't just be interested in English class. Not that any teenager would be like, oh, that's my number one interest. Although one of mine actually really loves English class. But pay attention, you're the expert in your children. So if your child really loves graphic novels, really loves art, doodling, really loves video games, and they're less interested in that, they can't distract themselves or have fun doing that, particularly if they've lost interest in communicating with their friends. By text, by chat, by Netflix party, however they're doing it, if they start to withdraw from that, then it's a good moment, first of all, to always check in with them, find out how they're feeling, and then connect with your pediatrician. Get more support. Now that school has started, even if it's suspended or it's only virtual, there are resources at our schools that are also to help us to do more assessment, to get some information if you're worried about your kids. And I would say at the end, trust your gut. If you still feel worried, even though there's nothing obvious, then I wouldn't worry alone. call the pediatrician's office, and always, always stay connected with your teenager. Be curious with them about how they're doing. Be curious with them about how they're thinking about what's going on. Don't assume you know what's making them sad or worried or tearful. But connect with them at those moments they're most likely to talk, and then be sure to listen. Listen with an open ears, open heart, and open mind. When you think you know what they're talking about, don't start talking yet. Ask for more. Let them explain even more. Let them play you the movie. They can play you the movie of what's got them stressed. You have really good information to go on and figure out if you need more help.
Great. Here's another question. I have noticed that students, teens, and parents require better coping skills at this time. What are some of the best techniques you find work for coping with any difficult situation?
I love this question. I think about coping skills all the time. But I would start by saying that a time of intense anxiety, of intense uncertainty or stress, is actually a very difficult time to build new coping skills. It's like trying to start a diet in the middle of a marathon. Your body is stressed, you're emotionally stressed. Whenever we're stressed, we lean on the things we most know how to do. So we tend to lean on our older coping skills. That's not a bad thing, but they're not always the healthiest coping skills. So what I would pay attention to, and I would do this with compassion for ourselves and for our children, is what are the things that you don't do right now when you're stressed? Do you tend to stress eat or retreat and watch television or YouTube videos? Or do you do other things that maybe leave you feeling really recharged afterwards? Like spend time on a phone or on a Zoom call. I forget the words for what we do now. On a Zoom call with your friends. Do you maybe go for a brisk walk and get your heart rate up and get a little bit of a nature bath? Those are things that typically will probably leave you feeling better than you did before you started coping. So add one new skill to your routine and see, since our stress and challenge is pretty consistent right now. It's not like you're just going to have a bad Thursday. The things we're facing are really in the landscape for the next maybe couple of months at a minimum. So add one new skill to your schedule. Build in a phone call with a friend that really charges your battery. And then help your child to do the same thing. Maybe even do something with your child. So we're lucky enough to live in a beautiful place, and we're lucky enough, I'll knock on wood, to have maybe the beginning of some containment of the fires that we were facing. So it may be a time where you could go outside for a walk. You could get to a beach and go for a walk. Get your heart rate up, get some air in your lungs, but do it together. Do it with your child, where there may even be a chance to listen and hear what they're doing. So pick one new strategy that you haven't tried before and add it into your week. You might even add it into your day. The coping skills that are typically most helpful include exercise. I would say thinking about whether something is restful and relaxing or whether it's recharging is really critical because you need to have both. And relaxing can be distracting, like listening to music, watching a TV show, chilling out with a good book. It gets your mind off of the thing that has you stressed. That's very helpful. Recharge is something that puts gas in your tank. Often that is exercise, that is communicating with a good friend, engaging with something that's creative or challenging, but that is stimulating. Making sure you have both kinds of strategies, and also making sure that when you are thinking about coping, separate out whether or not you're focused on coping with a feeling you have or coping with a fact. If you need to pack up your things because you're on alert and might need to evacuate, that's actually a fact. And you need to not just go take a bath to cope with the feelings of stress. It's probably important that you pack. So being able to focus on the facts and addressing the problems, and don't ignore the feelings, but be sure that you recognize that they're feelings and then give yourself some chance to do either the relaxing or the recharging. And here's the final thing I'll say about this. It's very personal, figuring out what are the coping skills that work for us. We all have some skills that we wish we could get rid of, whether it's stress eating or stress watching bad sitcoms from the 90s. I don't know what people mind, but there's always an opportunity to add new strategies. It's good to have a full range. Be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up for having coping skills that you wish you had different ones. Use them, but add a little bit to them with compassion for yourself and your children.
Wonderful. This one came online as well. My daughter is active in sports, music, and loves to socialize with her friends. She has not had these outlets since March and turns to electronics more than ever. She expressed a loss of her activities, choices, and friends. What do I suggest I do to keep her engaged and with not so much screen time?
It's a great question. It is all of our concerns about how to help ourselves, and particularly our teenagers, build lives of balance where screen time doesn't take up too much space, have been upended by the disruptions of the pandemic, and now even more compounded by the recent fires, where maybe we had to stay inside, away from smoke. So I would challenge us as parents to think not so much about how many hours a day our kids are spending on screen, but instead to pay attention to what are they doing on the screen and making sure that we're helping them have a balanced day. Spending time doing a virtual band practice over Zoom, and then doing school, and then having some senseless fun, playing Candy Crush, and then connecting with friends with a Zoom chat. Those are actually 4 very different activities that are really good for teenagers to be engaged in from a developmental perspective, right? Social skills, academic work, music practice, and relaxation. So just making sure that there's some balance in the day. If you have a teenager that's doing 9 hours a day of Fortnite, probably not so balanced. And instead saying, look, this is going to be a time where there's a lot more screen time than usual, but what matters is what are you doing on the screen? And are you engaged in activities that are really healthy for you, developmentally speaking? Then the piece I would add to that is it's important to remember with this much screen time, this is important for all of us, I'm experiencing it in my work days now too, that it's very natural to get a screen hangover. That if you spend more than 4 hours on the screen and then you leave your desk for a little while, you're going to feel a little headachy, bleary, probably a bit irritable. You may be hypoglycemic because you didn't remember to eat because you were so engaged in some activity. Prepare yourself as the parent, prepare your kids for how normal it is to feel a little wonky in the first half hour after they take time off of screen, and maybe build in a little rhythm to the day where there are some natural breaks. And again, anything you can do to put some physical activity into those breaks, especially if they can do it outside where there's some fresh air. And again, thankfully, we have a little more fresh air today than we did a few days ago. But getting their heart rate up, getting a little bit out in nature, breaking up all of that sort of interaction with a 2-dimensional medium is really, really healthy. But don't worry too much about how many hours they logged on the screen.
This was from a parent online. I have been following the rules around COVID and not allowing my children to socialize in person with other kids outside our household. Many parents who I love are inviting her and her other friends to come over and play. I feel like the only parent who is following the rules. Can you tell me how I can best express my concerns with other parents and with my child so that I don't look like the overprotective parent?
This is such a new challenge for all of us. I think it's so important for us first to recognize that we don't want to judge other people based on how they're assessing and handling risk and uncertainty related to the pandemic, but we also shouldn't judge ourselves based on how other people are handling it. And figuring out what our risk tolerance is and what's safe for ourselves or our family is going to be very different from family to family. Some of us may be the only adult taking care of an elderly parent. So it may be especially important that we not get exposed to this virus that could be very high risk for that elderly parent. Some of us may live in families where there is a cancer survivor or someone else who we think is really high risk for a different reason. Being ready to explain that to your child, to say, if you have a specific reason why, that we have a little more risk in our family. We have to be extra protective of grandma or of dad or of someone else. Sort of putting that frame around it and saying different families may have different kinds of risk. And then maybe think with your child. First, I would give a little space to let them feel sad or frustrated. We don't have to take their feelings away. It can be really healthy and adaptive for all of us in this time to bear a little bit of discomfort that comes with the losses, the inconveniences, the frustrations and disappointments that we're all facing. Sitting with your child and acknowledging that it's okay to feel that way, that you may not be able to fix it, but you're not turning away either. Does two things. It shows your child that you're confident that they can deal with it. And it also models for them a little bit how we deal with it, that we hold strong feelings. Because we know we're also going to, once again, experience joy, delight, creativity, maybe even the giggles. So bear it with them for a little while. And then you may set about thinking, what could we do? What could we do right now? Maybe that we couldn't do before. Whether it's about setting up screen chats with family that lives far away, maybe even overseas, doing something really cool that you never thought of doing. Apparently, I don't mean to give a plug for NASA, but apparently NASA's website has all these great virtual space station activities that you can do online where you practice docking the space station. So bringing some creativity into what might be the hidden opportunities in this moment. You don't have to be pretending that it makes it all right, but saying sometimes there's unexpected blessings in a time of difficulty. So I would say that's where you go. And always be respectful when you talk about this with your friends' parents. And we can expect others to be respectful of us too. Say we all have different levels of risk. Finding language that feels comfortable, but your assessment of what's tolerable and what's safe for you and your family is the most important one. That assessment matters.
Great, thank you. This is more about the long-term impact, which I think a lot of us worry about.
Yep.
How significant is the long-term impact on preschool through kinder-aged children of substantially reduced social interaction with peers over a 1 to 2 year period of time, assuming this is approximately how long we'll be going through this?
Yes. Well, there's good evidence that true social deprivation is tough on the development of preschoolers. But I would caution that as long as your preschooler isn't locked in the garage for the whole 1 to 2 years, as long as they're still interacting with you, and maybe even virtually with family members, teachers, and peers, that actually goes a long way. Now, that's not to say that this is going to be without consequence, because the littlest children definitely learn by doing and exploring with their eyes, with their hands, with their bodies, on a playground. And a lot of that learning is interpersonal. Learning how to share a toy in the sandbox, sometimes that takes a while. Learning how to take turns. All of that really happens very magically when they're at school with other kids. Some of that is going to be delayed when they're not physically at school with peers. Here's the good news about such little kids. Kids are like rubber. They're like plastic. So even if they were a year behind in that social development, whenever we get back to school, hopefully early in 2021, let's imagine, it's not going to take a whole year for them to make up for that development. They're already older, they've made some developmental strides while they've been home, cognitively and emotionally and in other ways. So once they get back into an in-person social setting, that development happens at a really accelerated rate. So most kids will snap back and be right back on track in a matter of weeks to months. So none of this is irreparable. I would say the critical piece is that what kids are used to getting is a lot more eye time with other kids and with different adults, not just mom and dad. So during this time, it's extra important, and I say this with all humility, because we're all carrying much more on our shoulders right now than we were, at the start of 2020. But protecting a little bit of time to be fully and completely engaged in your child, even when it doesn't help that dishes get done or that Zoom meeting for work happen or the other things that need to happen at home. Being curious with them, letting them teach you something, letting them decide what game you're going to play. Doesn't have to be all day, every day at all. It just needs to be protected a little bit of time every day. Maybe it's after dinner, maybe it's tub time. That alone will make a very big difference for the youngest kids.
Now we did get a lot of questions. There were actually 4 that were very similar to each other,
Mm-hmm.
and the common theme was that they were all around first grade age in elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to ask one of the 4 because I think it probably covers a lot of what the others asked. And this question was, my son is in first grade. School starts at 8:10 and ends at 2:45 with 2 short breaks. Then there is online homework. He is expected to sit in a chair in front of a screen for over 8 hours a day. It has become physically painful. He is frustrated, sad, and dreads waking up and having to do it. It feels like torture, and he has sucked the joy and curiosity from learning. Our school starts next week, and we have been given the same schedule. What can we do? He's only 6 and moves through his little life wanting to please his first teachers and has been excited to start school until now. I fear the long-term emotional effects of this rigid structure. Do you have any advice?
What a wonderful question. First grade is a particularly vulnerable moment, especially considering that most rising first graders already spent the last 3 months of their kindergarten year at home. They are officially in elementary school, but developmentally they still have a foot in preschool. They still need physical activity. Most first grade classrooms are built around a day in which there's a little bit more rhythm, a little more physical activity, a little more outside time. So I would say first, you're not alone. Clearly there's 4 questions like this. This is not a surprising consequence. Second, you are the expert on your child. So if your child is uniquely distressed by this, and in some ways what might matter right now is giving the new school day a try, that the schools are learning while we are learning. And it may be that while the schedule looks the same, the way the teacher is handling it, what they're doing in that day, maybe even getting up and doing jumping jacks or a run around during the day, there may be different strategies to bring some physical activity into the day. So I would go in with an open mind and maybe be present on your child's first day. That said, I would also communicate with the school, talk to the teacher that set up the day. Find out if there's any flexibility around the rhythm of the day so that there could be more physical activity, there could be more outside time. And be mindful of ways to really protect your child's ability to sit still. And here's what I would say, 8 hours is tough for a 52-year-old woman. It's going to be really tough for a 6-year-old child. Communicate with the school about maybe wanting to put some sensible parameters and some break times. Also, think with your child around. There may be ways to mute things. Kids have to go to the bathroom. Maybe they get a long bathroom break and you guys get to run around the house together. And also think about rewards that your child would find meaningful. So if your child is really feeling dread right now because the way the last school year ended felt really hard, you might want to say, well, what would you love to learn in this school year? See if you can plant a few mysterious surprises and say, what would you love to learn this year? Have them be watching for a certain word over the course of the day. Have them focus on what they want to learn. Maybe they want to learn piano. Maybe they want to learn how to identify a certain bird that you see in your yard a lot. So that they have a project with you as a parent, but they also have a little bit of a scavenger hunt that happens over the course of their day, watching for a word, watching for a friend. For some children, one of the hardest parts about virtual school, and especially at this age, is that they don't yet have the nuanced relationships with peers where they could just look at each other on a Zoom class and make a certain eye roll or eye contact or a certain kind of smile and feel really connected to special friends. So be sure that you provide a chance for them to connect with those special friends in a way that's safe, whether they get to play together with masks or they get to chat together on Zoom at the end of the day and talk about what it was like. That may really help ground them in school being a little more connected and a little more social, instead of it feeling like an 8-hour YouTube video that they're not interacting with.
This question came through on the live Facebook feed.
Okay.
Are there any impacts of distance learning specific to teens?
We don't know about them right now, and I would say one of the things I can speak to this a little bit just from the behavioral health perspective, and that doing virtual behavioral health, so this is like video therapy instead of live therapy, seems to actually work the best with teenagers of all the age cohorts that they're looking at, of littler kids, teenagers, adults, older adults. The group that seems to be the most connected with virtual therapy are teenagers. So I'm hopeful that teenagers may have a capacity to engage meaningfully with this medium, but not exclusively. To also be able to be thinking about friends, or maybe even texting with friends while they're in a class. It doesn't sound great, to me it sounds like a nightmare, but to still be three-dimensionally processing information and staying connected with their friends. We will have a lot more knowledge in the next 2 years of what the effect of distance learning is. I would say, so that you don't feel like I'm just saying, jury's out. We'll find out in several years what the studies say about our precious kids. That instead, you are the expert on your children. So staying connected with your kids, and with teenagers, what matters the most is actually showing up at the same time every day where they're most likely to talk. Some teenagers are more likely to talk when you're fixing dinner and maybe they're in the kitchen doing homework. Maybe some teenagers love to go to the grocery store with you for a late night run for ice cream. Take advantage of those moments where a teen is willing to be with you, because those are the times where you might check in about school, find out how it's going, and brainstorm with them about what might be missing. The hardest thing for some teenagers is they might have lost the variety and rhythm of their day, where there's physical activity, music, social time, as well as hard work. And if it starts to feel all like hard work, they're going to feel burnt out. That's what you want to be really alert to in this time. And then finally, again, maybe being curious with them about whether there's something they could be doing virtually that they would never have thought of doing during regular high school. Could they be taking a programming class from an online class? Not that too many teenagers have a lot of time, but treat it with total curiosity, because our teenagers teach us about these media and teach us about themselves. They're learning what they're interested in. A small benefit might be, teenagers, we want them to be exploring with all kinds of interests, and the fact that so much of it is virtual right now means they can't explore physically. They can't go try soccer, they can't go try fencing or gymnastics, but they can explore a lot of things they might not have explored otherwise, whether it's learning about organic farming, learning about firefighting, learning about meteorology, learning about NASA, things where they can actually procedurally try them virtually. Be curious with them and see if you can put that into their day, expand their sense of what's possible. Most of the time teenagers expand our sense of what's possible virtually, but let them know that it's valid. That's part of learning too.
Wonderful. And then I'm going to follow that up with a question about seniors in particular. Mm-hmm. We had 2 to 3 questions about that, mm-hmm. where, the seniors are mm-hmm. very involved in their schools and all these things, and now it's their final year, and basically all those things that they were involved with are not happening. And so mm-hmm. how do you help the seniors navigate through this year?
Well, I would start by saying that it is not our job as parents to protect our children from heartbreak, from loss, or from disappointment, no matter how much we would love to. And being ready to listen and acknowledge what feels unfair and frustrating, and feels sad that there's going to be grief this year. There will be things that people lose that they thought they were going to enjoy. Now we hope that most of those things are relatively small, that it's losing out on a live mock trial event, that it's losing out on prom. Maybe not. Hopefully they won't lose out on that. And not something bigger, like losing our home, losing someone that we love to a serious illness. But in any case, life brings us burdens as well as blessings. It brings us things that are not always fair and are not always what we were hoping for. When you sit beside your child and acknowledge how it might feel and be curious about how they're feeling, you demonstrate to them, again, that you're confident in their ability to handle this. You model the way that we handle things, which some things that can't be fixed have to be borne, and that it does get better. That when we bear things that are difficult, disappointing, frustrating, we eventually get our balance back, and we'll feel delight and joy and curiosity again. The trick is often to connect with what our story about ourselves is. It kind of brings me to the piece that I would maybe add to the answers to the other questions, which is thinking about the school day at all these different ages and how difficult it is to have a rich, satisfying school experience in such a sort of flattened, literally and figuratively, medium. And to say that as parents, we are uniquely equipped to be curious with our kids and be a resource for them in thinking about what brings them satisfaction, what's meaningful to them, what are their developing values. And when something hard happens in our lives, we have to bear it, we have to take it in, even and particularly in an unvarnished way. We have to take in the reality of it. But then being able to think a little more about what's your life story. You as the parent, and for you to help your child, think about what's their life story, what's their journey, where have they been, where do they think they might be going, and how is this event going to figure into their story? How do they put it into the context of their life story, so that it may actually help them redouble their efforts, or find something meaningful they want to do, maybe alter what they're interested in. Maybe it begins an interest in microbiology or meteorology or activism. Be curious with them to the degree that we can connect with what brings our lives meaning, and our kids are in the process of building that, of just figuring that out. That enables us to then regroup and sort of say, okay, what are we going to do tomorrow? What's next? That's where you build resilience and mental health. And our kids, as they're figuring out what brings them meaning, they really do so often through challenge. It's through moments where they've lost something, or they've been disappointed or frustrated, or faced something challenging, and they've discovered what matters to them. So you're a special expert on them. You might be able to listen again to what they might wish they could do if they were the president, if they were the governor, if they had 3 wishes. Listen to what they wish they would do. You can reflect on what you know of them, that when they were a child, they were always really interested in justice, or they were always really interested in figuring out how something worked so that they could maybe make it work better. And offering them that perspective on who they are, their sort of true selves, as they're figuring out what are their values. This is a moment. It's not an easy one. It's not an easy one for us all to be living through, but this is a moment that will very much help form their sense of what they're capable of, what they want their life to include, what makes work meaningful. So there will be loss. There will be disappointments this year. You can't fix it, even though we wish we could, but you can sit next to your kid. You can validate how sad it is and how you wish it wasn't so, and how you also know that maybe someday in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, you'll be talking about this incredible, difficult, crazy year and marveling about it. Maybe marveling about the really interesting and exciting things that came out of it for them.
Okay, this one came in online. There seems to be two schools of thought on structure at home for distance learning. Our district has a code of conduct having to be dressed, sitting up straight in chairs, not on a bed, etc. But I have read trauma-informed teaching best practices that say to avoid this type of power struggle to avoid trauma to kids and families. Can you guide us on how to educate our school?
Well, I would say that there's probably two approaches here. I'm always cautious to invoke trauma-informed care for a whole population. That if we're talking about kids who are survivors of sort of a detailed trauma, and I don't mean to be dismissive of the strain and stress and anxiety of all of the events of the last year, but to distinguish it from coming through an experience that was life-threatening or in which you witnessed a violent event. That's a very different kind of trauma. And the sustained, chronic, sort of unremitting stress that maybe kids and families are going through in 2020 is difficult and draining, but different than an acute trauma. Kids who have experienced trauma, it is important that they get to preserve agency so that they have some control over how they manage their bodies in space and manage themselves. All of us benefit from having some agency. And I would instead maybe communicate with the school, but also communicate with your child around what's going to make school work best for them. Start with your child. Is it about having a comfy chair? Is it about being maybe set up outside where there's some sun and fresh air if it's not noisy or not too distracting? Is it about having you nearby or having you far away? But find out from them what they think might be helpful. And then be ready to correct course. Because if they think it's going to be helpful to have a bag of M&Ms and be in bed all day, probably that's not really what's going to help them go to school. So find a way to thread the needle and say, we're not an authoritarian, top-down controlling system that says all kids must report to their screen at 8:15 a.m., but instead saying, look, the school's doing their best. They're trying to make this work for everybody, and they really want to see if this is going to be a way for you and your classmates to learn. So let's have an open mind and an open heart, but you tell me what you think you need to be able to be present for most of the day. And then pay attention. At the end of the day, be like, what worked? What didn't work? If it really requires something that violates the school's code, I wouldn't hesitate to reach out to the school, to communicate either with the teacher or with the principal or with the head of guidance and talk about what you would propose for your child and why. Why is it going to help? Some kids need a chair that's a rocking chair so they can fidget a little, and have a little movement preserved. Come up with something, have it based on what you've observed, but give your child agency in that way. Let them work with you to think about what might help them attend to a long screen-based day. And I would also suggest that we shouldn't, as parents, be afraid of incentives or rewards. We won't call them bribery because we make the rules in our own homes, so you can't go to jail for bribery. But thinking about offering them some natural incentives for being able to do something that's a little uncomfortable. Sitting still to listen to someone talk about math, for me, that would have been a hard day, and especially without your friends nearby that you're going to talk to at gym next. So thinking with them about what is going to make them feel rewarded at the end of the day. And particularly, maybe we don't have to buy them, a new pair of sneakers every day, but thinking about time for younger kids with you. Younger kids love having time with parents. It's like $100 bills for them. So whether if they get through their school day, then you get to go on a walk and maybe you'll end up someplace where you could get ice cream or something. That's a wonderful natural incentive that acknowledges how hard this is and that they did something really hard. And for teenagers, there may be different incentives. It may be about Usually it's not time with you, but it might be. But it might be time with friends, it might be access to the car, it might be access to more screen time that they won by doing a great job concentrating at school. So don't be afraid of offering some incentives, because this is hard. It's really hard to attend to a long, dry, screen-based interaction.
Now this question is a little bit different than the rest, and do you think it's possible that not being in school will actually improve the mental health of some kids, particularly teens?
Yes. I think it's an easy question in some ways. I've already seen it. I think that there's two different ways in which this could happen. Maybe I shouldn't have answered so quickly. I love school. I don't mean to say that school's bad for their mental health, but for some teens, particularly those who may be perfectionists, who are super driven and are not maybe fully doing the work they should be doing during adolescence, which is exploring new interests with room to fail. Some who are only focused on performance and perfection. School is a burdensome time for them. Being focused on performance, but maybe in a narrower realm, and in some ways forced to improvise a little bit, and maybe look for activities that are going to be meaningful or engaging. That might be new for those kids, and it might be just what they need developmentally, and it may have softened their stress levels enough that they're sleeping better and functioning in a way that's overall healthier. Also, for some kids who are experience a lot of anxiety, not having to go to school may in the short term feel like a great relief, and they may be a little more happy and chipper at home. For those kids, and you parents are experts on whether or not you have an anxious child, a child who typically is a little slow to warm up with new things, who wants to do very well at everything, but is doesn't love having to get up in front of the classroom or perform physically. When that's your child, they may feel relieved not to be sort of out center stage, having to perform in school, but you want to make sure that they still push themselves to manage their anxiety. You don't want to overly accommodate this anxiety with letting them avoid everything. So maybe making sure that they still do band practice virtually, even though it's not the same as going to school, but they're a little worried they're not going to be perfect. With that child, you want to push a little, because when school eventually restarts, they're going to have a tall order. They're going to feel like they're not sure how to manage their anxiety unless they've been doing it during this whole time. The third way I think it might be actually helping mental health, and I think this actually might be true for all of us, that to the degree that we're not facing a catastrophic disruption, if we're not facing the serious illness or loss of a loved one, if we're not facing profound financial hardship that's sort of come out of the pandemic, loss of a job, loss of a home. If instead we're facing sort of the uncertainty and disruption of slowing down and being at home more, maybe being with each other more, that actually can greatly improve everyone's mental health to the degree that we're all forced to be a little more present in the present. Maybe enjoying our meal together, maybe focused on playing cards after dinner, instead of everybody going their separate ways for sports and activities and work meetings. So to the degree that this moment in time has forced us to slow down, I would encourage all of us to embrace that. Spend a little more time with your friends, maybe online or via Zoom. Spend more time with your family. Get to know your teenagers because they're changing every day and it's hard to keep up. And enjoy maybe some of the small delights. Maybe you find some new things that recharge your battery that you forgot about, whether it's backgammon or going on walks together. So I think in that way, this is a moment that has the potential to greatly improve everyone's mental health.
I love how you're talking about connecting with your teens and your children and taking this time to do that. This question relates to that in saying that can you recommend any websites or other resources where we can ask our teens to read and then we follow up and talk to them about it?
Oh, that's a great question. So I guess I would say it depends on what you're asking about specifically. One of the things that I have found, because I never have time to keep up with like great websites or great resources that feel clinically relevant to me. I love to talk to my own kids about television shows or maybe sports teams. Right now we don't have live sports teams, but to be able to have a shared discussion that's not my teen and I looking at each other eye to eye and me saying like, how's it going? And them saying, fine. Instead, we're next to each other and we're talking about something we both just watched, whether it's a movie or a Netflix show, a reality show. Almost all, even trashy television, is good material. And there is a lot of material right now, whether it's on television or it's in the news, being able to then have conversations about what you've seen and thinking about what that's, how do we make choices when we're under stress? How do we think about drugs and alcohol? How do we think about our commitments to one another or what we do in relationships? All these things are heavy, important conversations we often feel like we should be having with our teens regularly, and there's an opportunity to do that right now. If you're thinking of specific resources, I would say, I'm a shrink, so I'm going to give you a shrinky resource. There is the NIDA, which is the National Institute on Drug Abuse, has a website called NIDA for Teens, and they describe all different kinds of substances, from alcohol and cigarettes, marijuana, and things that I sometimes, when I visit the website, I'm like, oh, I didn't know about that. So like they have pretty much everything that might be available for kids. And it can be an amazing jump start for a conversation with your kids about drugs and alcohol and choices they might be facing when they go back to school, or that they might be hearing about when they're texting and talking with their friends, and certainly when they go off to college, which will someday happen. So that's a wonderful website. Beyond that, I would actually then ask your teens what website they like visiting. What YouTube star are they watching? What influencer on Instagram, I can't believe I'm saying these words, it makes me feel 80 years old, are they really into following? And then you go check it out. You go check out where they like to go on the web. And then you have a lot of material for a conversation. So I'd follow their lead if you don't have something already in mind.
Great. Okay, the fire, on top of everything else, was disturbing to my children. Now even distance learning is postponed for at least another week. How do I talk to them about what is going on in the world so that I'm being realistic without scaring them or scarring them for life?
I know, the distance learning felt so difficult and burdensome until it got suspended for something more immediate and frightening. You know what? Whenever we're trying to communicate with our kids about something that is really difficult, so whether it is life-threatening natural disasters, whether it is maybe heartbreaking acts of violence, trying to explain maybe the protests after George Floyd's death, and what had happened to him, and why there were such widespread protests. Anytime we set about talking with our children, especially young children, about the ways in which life can be brutal sometimes, or very unfair, or frightening, it feels really fraught. And I would caution you, with your youngest kids, all the way up through your adult kids, to actually start by being curious with them to find out what they know, and whether or not they heard about whatever it is you're thinking about. What do they know about the fires? So if we're talking about the fires, say, what do they know? What have they heard? Where did they hear it? Are they hearing it just from people at home, from mom and dad talking amongst themselves? Are they hearing it from their siblings? Are they hearing it in chats with their friends? Or are they going online and Googling it? So start by finding out what they know and finding out if what they understand is accurate. Because often, Googling things, especially for young kids, does not necessarily illuminate. It may throw off a lot more heat than light, as it were. So find out what they know, and offer some thoughtful clarification. And it's even a chance to help them think about, how can you be a smart, skeptical user of the internet? What websites can we trust, and how can we tell? And how can you tell just by how something is written? Always reminding kids that if you're worried, you should never worry alone. And worrying with Google is alone. They should come to someone they trust, hopefully an adult, to try to get some answers. And if you don't know, you'll go look together. Once you know a little bit more about what they know, and maybe what they're worried about, maybe even what they're not worried about. Because I would add this, before you start talking, check in with yourself and find out how worried you are, how stressed you are. I know this last week, I was probably more worried about the fires than any of my kids were. And in wanting to talk to them and check in with them, they eventually were like, we're okay. We're okay. And I was like, oh, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the one that's really stressed. This is a hard one to hold. So check in. Figure out sort of where your stress level is. Make sure you can distinguish between what you're afraid of, what you're feeling, and what they're feeling. And whether you don't have to feel no stress to talk to them. That wouldn't make sense. But you want to feel calm enough to be able to listen and hear what they're thinking and hearing and feeling about it, even when it's different from where you're at. And then you do that. Then you talk with them about what you think they need to know. And again, this is that focus on problem coping versus feeling coping. There may be some facts that everyone has to deal with first. If you were in a situation where you have to get the cars packed up and get out of the house, that's a very different conversation. It's a quicker conversation where you make sure you have the facts and offer reasonable reassurance. Then the feeling-focused conversation where you take your sweet time and the facts you're interested in are, what do they know, what are they feeling, what are they worried about, and then offering support, correction where the facts were wrong, and maybe even some strategies. Finally, I would say always focusing with our littlest kids to our teenagers, even our adult kids, even ourselves. Some focus on what can we do, whether it's something we can do for ourselves. If we don't need to evacuate, are there things we can do to be ready, to make our house safe? But even more meaningfully, what are things we can do for others? Are there others that are more vulnerable? Is there a chance to take care of a neighbor's pets because they were a little closer? Is there a chance to connect with a nursing home that's been facing the double burdens of COVID and now perhaps the threat of evacuation, and find out if they're welcoming maybe young people reading stories with them or playing music for them virtually over Zoom? Be creative. Let your child be creative. Meaning is extremely organizing at times of upheaval, distress, and uncertainty. Looking for what brings us meaning and what's going to bring our kids meaning. And oftentimes, that's how do we help other people? And let your child lead the way. Let them come up with some good ideas and some creative ideas. Life does bring difficult events. They often affect others in more profound ways than us, but that doesn't mean that we don't all know what it is to suffer and to worry. So reminding your kids, don't worry alone, and what might we do for other people are really powerful sort of principles to keep in mind whenever you're talking about something difficult. And then you can't get it wrong. That's the final thing to remember. You get lots of do-overs. If you have one conversation, especially with younger kids, you're going to have another one 3 hours later. So you'll have a whole other chance to talk about it, maybe in a slightly different way. So you can't get it wrong. The process is the point. Being there, being curious, trying, being ready to hold the heavy stuff and even find the delight, the funny, the absurd. That's how we all get through difficult times. And you're teaching your kids how you do it too.
Wonderful. So we only have a couple minutes left. I was wondering if there's anything that you wanted to share with the community that hasn't been asked in regards to the mental health of our parents or kids as we go through this time.
What a great question. I guess I would just follow up on that last point that I made, which is to say as much attention as we may all be paying to our kids, it's critically important to take really good care of ourselves. This has been, I won't call it a traumatic year. For some, I'm sure it has been. But at a minimum, it has been a year of sustained and even surprising stresses. That takes a toll on us. So being compassionate and kind with yourself, being thoughtful about what you need to both relax and to recharge. It can feel indulgent to think about how am I going to relax or recharge when you're trying to work, when you're thinking about evacuating, when you're trying to run a homeschool, maybe worried about your aging parents. We're juggling so much. Taking a moment to maybe simplify, think about the things that really matter and put yourself in that circle of the things that really matter. Making sure you get enough good sleep, making sure you have exercise, making sure you have time that charges your battery with adult people who you like, whether it's your spouse or your friends, near or far away, virtual or socially distanced and masked up. It is not selfish or indulgent to take good care of yourself during this time. It's so valuable. Think about being on the plane. And if the air masks drop, the oxygen masks drop, you always have to put on yours first before you put one on your child. That's true as our children become older, teenagers and even adults. You have to take care of yourself first. And we'll get through this. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So take care of yourself like it's a marathon. Rest, sleep well, hydrate, carb load, maybe not too much carb loading. But you deserve it, and your children will be better if you take good care of yourself too.
Thank you so much, Dr. Swick. We really appreciate you being here. We're just so lucky to have you in our community. We look forward to what Ohana will bring us in the coming years. For those who want additional videos of Dr. Swick, we do have them on montagehealth.org/Ohana. And then also, if you want to see any of our other question and answer Facebook Live recordings, we do put them out on chomp.org on our coronavirus page. So you can look there as well and see any of our past videos that we've done. Again, thank you to all the parents and the teachers and all the concerned community members who want to help our kids and help themselves in getting through this. And we'll say goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you all. Is that one still?
Yeah, but that one's not live, so.